Hey folks, Steve here with a special video today. This is sort of a sequel to a video I did the other week, Fun with Maps. So this is Fun with Maps Part 2, or the sequel, number 2, A World at War and World in Flames. And today happens to just be a really good day for recording videos, so I know folks are waiting for my next Dark Valley video. I'm going to be recording that later today. I just have some extra time because I sort of have the house to myself today. I did some errands, and I'm going to record this video, probably go eat some lunch, fix myself some lunch, and then I'm going to come back and do Dark Valley recording. But for this, I just thought, I was just struck by inspiration, and I wanted to do another Fun with Maps video. This time I'm using my actual video camera, so it's not so shaky, and because this one's going to be a little bit longer with some cuts in it, because I'm just having a lot of fun today. So, I'm going to be talking about A World at War and World in Flames for a couple of reasons. They're good games to compare and contrast because they both sort of sit in the, I guess, space of big monsters, grand strategic World War II games with a lot of counters, can be very intimidating, and it's just sort of neat because both game systems truly have been around for decades. And they've sort of, evolved alongside each other, and they're, in some ways, I think one game maybe does some things better than the other. Truth be told, I'm a bit biased, and I prefer World in Flames over World at War because I've just had a heck of a time trying to learn a World at War. I did a whole video on my channel where I was basically complaining and moaning about it, to put it lightly, I guess. But still, an interesting exercise to look at in terms of comparing maps. So that's what this video is going to do, and we'll sort of get right into it. But again, this video will have cuts just so I can better position the camera to look at the maps and talk through each game. So we'll put a cut here and we'll be right back. Okay, so we're going to focus on A World at War first for a second, just to provide some background context. A World at War has actually existed in different forms for several decades, a few decades, I don't know, back 70s, 80s time frame. It first existed as a game called Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, I believe was the full title. A lot of people would just shorten it down to Third Reich, I guess, and or 3R, meaning Third Reich. And that was one of the probably most popular at the time grand strategy games for World War II. There were other ones around, I think. I'm not sure which one was the first one. But it was certainly popular to a degree, and I think that game in a vacuum was relatively simple compared to what we're dealing with today. And it just became popular because it was something that you could spend a lot of time in. You could learn the rules well and play the whole European war. And that's an important thing to point out because it was Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It was Europe only. Eventually, after so many years of being in print and having a couple different editions, it sort of was redone as a game called Advanced Third Reich. And, a product of the times, like there's Dungeons and Dragons, and then there was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. There was Third Reich, and then Advanced Third Reich, A3R. And around the same time, there was then a game covering the Pacific Theater that came out that was basically using the same Skeleton Bones system, basically the same system, though it had a more advanced naval aspect to it, I guess. I think that was Empire of the Rising Sun, I think was the name. I'm kind of cheating because I'm not giving you the best answers. I'm just sort of going off my memory at the moment, because it's a Sunday morning and I'm just having fun. But then eventually, some years back, the primary designer of World at War, Bruce Harper, who had done design work for those advanced era games, decided to make it one big game. He called it A World at War, and it put together Advanced Third Reich and the Rising Sun game with basically a single naval system so that it all could work together, and was an attempt to sort of just create one complete package. And in my opinion, I don't own any of the previous editions, so a lot of this is just going off of what I've read and researched, but whatever the World at War has become is a very gnarly creature. And what's funny is if you look at the rules, and we'll look at the map here, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. There's not as much going on in terms of the map as you would think, and in fact, if you were to read through some of the rules of World at War, you would think this actually isn't that terribly complicated of a game, or it shouldn't be. But in the process of becoming a World at War and the various addition and rules updates to a World at War, the game has actually become quite complicated due to all the exceptions and weird things that over time the game has gotten added to it or changed about it. To me, it's become a bit of an unruly mess to try to learn the game because of that. It's a real issue, I think, with the game. But again, it's still funny to look at the map and then go, well, this doesn't seem like it should be that difficult. It shouldn't be that hard, and yet, in a lot of ways, I think it is. Maybe someday we can cover it in this channel in a better way and I can learn it. Or, even better, for those who are watching, if you like a World at War and you don't like to hear me complain about it, I ask you, please, take a look at some of my World in Flame videos and see the format that I try to do instructional videos for that, and put them out for a World at War for me. I would love to learn it, and I'd love for someone to do some sort of instructional series so I could learn it better than in a vacuum right now. And there's really nobody that's done anything. Callendale did some videos, and they're not really instructional videos. It's him kind of talking about his gameplay experience. What I really would like is something like I've done for World at War, where it's really instructional, teaching you the game. That would be very useful. Anyway, let's get into the actual map stuff, because that's really what this video is all about, is fun with maps. So here is just the Europe map, and today I'm only going to be looking at the Europe maps. Anything I say here will kind of go for the Pacific theater maps, because it's, the comparisons are valid across both. So you can see this is two maps kind of laid together. I don't have plexi on them just for the sake of ease here in this video. You can see it's got your Europe, Spain, Gibraltar to the depths of Russia, and actually gets the entirety of the Caspian Sea on map here. Though I suspect not too many of those hexes will ever really be used. Something you'll notice, again, I think this speaks to how rules light the game may have been in the past. You really don't have much in the way of terrain on the map. And in fact, if you were to look at the vast majority of the hexes, they are what we would probably call clear terrain. There are some rivers that are important. There's the Maginot Line series of fortresses. That's always important to point out. And there are some mountains in Europe. But for the most part, you're going to be playing in what would be just clear terrain for all that matters for combat and movement, which is kind of interesting. Now you have the Alps in northern Italy and in the region you would expect it. You've got the Carpathian Mountains, you've got mountains in Greece, you've got mountains in Turkey. But for the most part, it's a lot of clear terrain. A few things stick out. So there are the marshes, Pripyat marshes. There are oddly some forests, wilderness notated in Russia, but nowhere else on the map, which to me seems very strange. But again, depending on what level you're looking at it from for this game, it's irrelevant, I suppose. There are some interesting terrain features on the map. So there are specifically beach landings. So in this game, if I have read the rules correctly in the past, you can do amphibious invasions, but they have to be on these beach hexes. Basically, hexes that it's really a valid place for a naval invasion. You can't just plop anywhere because you don't have the beach or portage to do it correctly, or to do it in a way that makes any sort of sense. So you have to go to where there are beaches. Obviously, there are some beaches where D-Day happened, and there are beaches scattered everywhere else. Other kind of important things to look at on the map, there are objective cities, so objective hexes effectively. That counts for victory. That's going to be something that we see across both games. And what's really kind of interesting in a way that I think, again, speaks to how the game used to be more simple than it is today, is on various points throughout the map. You see notations. I'm going to try to flatten it out so you can see it better, but it's going to be hard to. You see different call-outs for BRPs. I'm going to try to, maybe over here is a better example. Yeah, actually this should work if I can get it. There we go. This is a great example. So, in A World at War, in this system, Third Reich system, production is based around basic resource points. BRP is sometimes called burps. I've heard them called burps. And what's interesting is that in this game, you're either getting BRPs from a region, if you control it, or particular hexes have BRPs. And these are sort of considered, I think they're like either called industrial centers or something like that, where, just as a comparison, you can see Essen here has a notation that says 25 BRPs. That means when there's production, having that hex, having that city, for Germany at least, is worth 25 resource points. Now, there's a bunch of weirdness in A World at War where, you have to prorate it depending on what time of year you're using it, and all this kind of weird, goofy stuff that, again, probably makes the game more complicated than it ought to be, in my opinion, but, there you go. But by comparison, you have whole countries or regions that are worth a certain amount of BRP. So the Netherlands is worth 10, Belgium is worth 15, Luxembourg is worth 5. So what's funny is, Essen, the hex Essen, and technically Dusseldorf, which is in the same hex, has more production, or has equal production value as the Netherlands and Belgium combined, which is kind of interesting. And this sort of goes elsewhere on the map. There are these sort of minor countries that are controlled by major powers that, as long as they control that region, and I think that is governed by control of the cities and capitals of those individual regions, the powers will get those resource points. Now, it gets kind of complicated as to, if you were to take, let's say, as the Allies, you took Essen, if you would get those 25 BRPs, but you would get them on a prorated basis, depending on, again, the time of the year that you've got them, and then, the Germans would lose access to those BRPs. There's sort of, it is straightforward, I guess, but it just definitely seems like a roundabout way to look at it. So you're looking at BRPs that way, and because it's not a uniform way of production, you really have to kind of be aware of, what are all the BRPs that you're supposed to be getting, and what ones do you not have access to, or which ones do you have issues with for any old given reason. There's also some interesting terrain features on here, in that there are, I guess it's not terrain, but these boxes over here. So these are strategic warfare boxes, or holding boxes. So there's basically, the U.S., so the U.S. exists over here. The Axis can never ever get over there, which is kind of interesting. And I guess, it makes sense from a historical perspective if you're really putting a clamp down on historical bits. And then you have the Atlantic Strategic Warfare box, which also represents different segments of the area. So it's saying, there's a Mediterranean one, there's an Eastern one, there's also the Western, which is going to govern a lot of the subs and the convoys in the Atlantic Ocean, and then the different areas over here. And what's kind of weird with this game is that, you have strategic units like the convoys, like the subs, like strategic bombers, and what you do is you put them up there rather than on the game map proper. For the most part, there's some exceptions, I think, to that in some different cases. But then you play through that, and it in some way it's simplified because you're just really putting assets and forces in a box rather than somewhere on the map. But it does kind of create this sort of divorced situation on how you're looking at it. Otherwise, you can have naval units on the map, and the way the game has it is that they're actually represented by individual hexes. There are rough, labels saying, okay, well, this is the Atlantic Ocean, this is the North Sea, but there's really no, here's where one stops and here's where one ends, because you're really playing in the sphere of hexes and range from where a naval unit might be based, I think. I'm not super sharp on the naval rules of the game. But you can see there are the fort hex sides there. Places like Malta are represented here appropriately. You can see that. And probably the only other thing that's worth pointing out that they also have oil in this game, and so oil hexes have the little whatever you call those things. Gosh, I can't remember what they're called, and I feel bad. Hey, Sunday morning, I got to finish my coffee. So obviously those are places where you can get oil, and in this game, yeah, you do get oil counters. You use them to sort of enable the activities of certain units, and it's straightforward to me. I understand how oil works because I play World in Flames with oil, and in this game, it's sort of got a very similar function. So when you're playing the game, like a World War II strategic game, you're paying attention to rivers. Sometimes terrain, you're looking to grab oil, you're looking to grab objective hexes, you're looking to grab important cities with great industrial capacity, or at times just straight up conquering minor countries to gain control of them as well. Now, I'm not sure how it works to where, like, if the Axis takes all of these BRP places, can they make use of all of them at full value? I think I have to look into that. Because that just isn't realistic, right? And I'm pretty sure there's some limit on what the Axis can do with it. You can't just assume because you get Paris, you're going to get 20 BRPs every turn. I think it's something different with that. I can't speak to it because, again, I haven't really fully absorbed the rules. But yeah, so in the Middle East, there's going to be more oil. This map does show some chunks of Persia and pretty much all of Iraq on it. Lebanon, and then it gets into Egypt and shows sort of North Africa all the way over. So, pretty straightforward stuff. Again, it's not a very crazy looking map, but, there it is. So now let's draw a comparison to, as I move my camera instead of cutting like a goofball, let's look at World in Flames. Now, you're probably going to go, Steve, that map looks weird. Well, I brought out first the 5th edition of World in Flames. This is an older edition. Technically the first edition that I've owned, though I've never really played it. I got it at a convention for a pretty reasonable price, pre-owned. I'm pretty sure I have all the components for it, but I've not actively really tried to play it. Now, this particular one is on a single map. And just to talk to World in Flames, again, it's been around for a long time. It's gone through various major editions, this being the 5th, which for a lot of people is sort of like a line in the sand, because beyond 5th edition, World in Flames changed a great deal. So like 5th edition is like the most polished up modern of like old WiF. And you can kind of see that the map isn't terribly different looking from a World at War. There's a lot of sort of white clear terrain. There are some mountains in various parts, very similar to a World at War, though there are some mountains and hexes that don't have them in World at War, just different stuff. Though this one does have more forest-type terrain in here than a World at War. So you have the Ardennes, you've got some Alsace region-type forest there. You've got more scattered forest in Yugoslavia, even in Poland a bit, and then similarly you've got the marshes and whatnot in Russia. And in this map doesn't quite cover the Caspian. It sort of ends right as you get to the Caspian once you've got the Caucasus there. It shows some of Persia, most of Iraq, and then it does show Egypt, though it is pretty tight around the map edge here, and a lot of sort of space you'll probably never use in Algeria. It's a very kind of different setup. But again, very similar. It is relatively simple looking. And, where a World at War didn't undergo a huge amount of map changes over the different game editions, this one, you'll see here shortly, World in Flames has changed over the years. This one, what's really interesting with the production of this is that World in Flames doesn't use burpees or anything like that, or BRPs. It does have production, and this might be a con to some people, I think it's a pro to me in a lot of ways, that World in Flames has a bit more of an involved production system where hexes have factories, but also have resources. And those resources are going to range from, sort of being a catch-all for iron, steel, copper, zinc, whatever. And then there's also oil resources. So again, just to show, Romania as an example, you've got the same sort of thing that I can't remember the name of, oil well structure. There in Romania, there's also some in the Middle East, obviously. So depending on how you're playing World in Flames, the sort of symbol, the shovel and pick resource there can be treated the same as oil, so they're both just a resource, or if you're playing specifically to point out oil as a special resource to be used in special ways, you treat them differently. But you get production by making sure that that resource can get to a factory. So a resource plus a factory that you can use is a production point, and then those production points are basically multiplied by a value that depends on the gearing up and mobilization of your country for your real build points. Arguably, it's just as complicated maybe as a World at War, but to me, I don't know. It makes a little bit more sense because there's a real logic to, well, if I invade France and I can nab these hexes, I'm going to get some resources that I can ship back to my factories and make use of while I'm still conquering France. Or it could be that I've lost, I've gotten an area cut off, and while I might control a resource, I can't get it to a factory. So it just adds a lot more realistic logistics to that production. And there's differences between like the red factory and the black factory, and basically that's the limiting factor on Axis conquering, is that you can make use of red factories from a conquered area, but you can't make use of a black factory, so you only get so many increases in production for conquering these areas, but it's still worthwhile to do so. There are rivers. You can see they're kind of faint on this map, but there are rivers to be careful of. There's no, separation of beach hexes, but there are places with ports. They've got that little anchor there. And you can have a port but no city, which is kind of interesting. And you've got your cities on here. So here's Britain. And similarly, World in Flames also makes use of objective cities that matter for victory, and they're in red text as well. That's something both games sort of share there. Nothing too crazy. Shouldn't be too surprising. Probably one of the biggest differences between the two of the maps are that technically, yeah, there are ways to count hexes in the sea regions. And boy, this map doesn't show it very well. I might have to... It's just the color's real rough because this is an old map. You can see, okay, here's one. Western Mediterranean. It's the sea box format of adjudicating naval stuff. And what it's really saying is there's a whole naval region here that is the Western Mediterranean. And when you have naval units there, they're not in a specific hex. They might be in a port, in which case they're at the port. They're not in the sea box or sea zone. But when they're in the sea zone, they're somewhere along these boxes and is representing some level of them patrolling or at station in that region, sort of patrolling the waters, and able to take whatever action may be necessary at some point. So I really like the sea area system because it allows you to kind of say, okay, well, I'm patrolling the North Sea. I'm not, some units are vaguely sort of in the North Sea somewhere. They're in the North Sea, they're patrolling, they're going to be at any given point somewhere in the North Sea, and we're not going to bother attempting to show that, but we're going to show how well they're patrolling that region, and that's going to have gameplay mechanics. So I do like that. There are things that are on the sidebar here, so stuff that's off map. There's stuff that will represent countries that are farther away. So the U.S. Represented a little bit by some boxes over there. Not showing them either. The later editions of World in Flames will have an America's map. Yeah, so this is sort of, it is different. It's similar but different, understanding that they both are coming from the same time frame era of design, just different approaches to the design mechanics. Okay, so I'm gonna take a cut here. So this video is already getting long, 22 minutes. I'm gonna take a cut here. I'm gonna put a different map on next to the World at War map and do one more little bit of a comparison here. Okay, so I just barely got the map on the table for comparison. This is going to be tough. Okay, so this is the latest collector's edition of World in Flames. I think this would technically be considered 8th edition, I think. 7th or 8th edition. I don't really use that terminology on here, but it's roughly 8th edition, I think. And, of course, it's the gigantic box because it's like the super deluxe edition collector's package, and there's a ton of stuff inside the box, and it's really heavy, so it's like the big monster ultimate experience for World in Flames. And the map, I'm not even going to be able to get it all on camera at once. It's very big. It's got 2 sides here, right? So two maps put together, much like the World at Flames, or World at War, I'm sorry. A World at Flames, oh gosh. And it looks a lot different, obviously, from the last World in Flames one. And, of course, just by point of comparison with the World at War, it is a lot busier looking. So, relatively clean looking, not a lot as much on the board. Here, there is a lot going on. Just a lot going on. In fact, I need to zoom in. We'll zoom in the rough same area we've been looking at in several of these videos. I'm going to zoom in to this region here that we have been looking at. And you can see there's just a lot going on. But the reality is, and this is something that I kind of speak to in favor of World in Flames, for as much as that's going on here, what's really helpful is that what's on the map is very informative for what you need to be aware of. And it sort of ties back to like the differences between these two games. So World at War right now is a relatively simple base skeleton, because it started with the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And then you basically got all this other stuff strapped onto it over the years. And so World at War, the map, relatively simple, but there's a lot of extra rule stuff that's all off-map that you need to remember or keep track of or understand, and it fools you into thinking the game's more simple than it really is, and then you've got a bunch of paperwork. While A World in Flames has a more complicated map, but most of the important information that's on here is really all that you're going to need to really play the game. And in terms of paperwork, A World in Flames, you maybe have your production sheet, and it's like barely a couple lines long. There's really not much to it. And I guess to even pile on that, maybe if I can show you. Well, you might need a spreadsheet to do World of War production. I just have, I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit for you. It's just a couple of lines and what I built for a turn as the axis in a in-person game I'm playing, right? So it's really relatively simple because everything I really need to know is already on the map. I just need to put my logic through it, and it takes a few seconds. There's not too much in the way of special rules to worry about. So just to kind of show, very similar to the last World in Flames, the factories are on here. They just look a little bit different. So they're these sort of smokestacks. We have red icons. Those are factories that can be made use of if conquered. You have the resources here, which are made to stand out a little bit more on this map by having the orange circle. And then you have terrain. And in this version of the game, terrain appears to be represented a lot more. So you actually have forests throughout Germany and Poland, all through different areas. The mountains are present here in dramatic effect all over the place. There's the Pripyat marshes, but there are marshes all throughout northern Russia as well. And so there's just a lot more going on, but again, I think it is more informative of what's happening. There's also rail lines that matter in this edition for supply purposes. And then you also have these icons here that have to do with partisans. And so, you got to know how partisans work. It's a relatively straightforward process. And what the map is just telling you is that each country is going to have some rebellion factor that will factor into partisans, and it tells you right on the map. So if you want to know, oh, hey, what's the deal with partisans for Belgium, I can look right on the map. I don't need to do some weird special rule lookup in the rule book to find out. I can just simply look and say, oh, it's a value of 3, and then depending on, if there are any units garrisoning the country, that's going to matter for partisans, and you roll a die. Very straightforward, very systematic. Elsewise on here, or elsewhere, we've got Morocco and Algeria, but what you also have along the edge of the map here, similar to the other World in Flames map, but this one goes in a little bit more detail with it. You've got sort of an extra zoomed out scale hexes to represent these other countries of Africa, and all along the south of that map is different regions of Africa, so that you're in effect showing the important relevant bits of Africa on this map in a different scale, but still representing them in a way that can be worked in the game system. And so you're getting a little bit more mileage out of your map than maybe a World at War does. And even with a World at War's sort of additional holding boxes, those holding boxes, have their own special rules tied up in them. These really are following the same basic game rules that you're used to. It's just they're at a different scale, and so you have to spend more movement points to move through them. And the Axis isn't necessarily restricted from going to these places. If they can manage to do it, they're allowed to do it, where in a World War they can't. Now, some of it is still a little bit scrunched, so what we don't have is Persia on the map, except for a couple of hexes. We get some of Iraq, some of Saudi Arabia, and then up through here, really to give more space to Russia, so you can have your big Barbarossa, East Front stuff going on. And of course, World in Flames has, its Pacific map. It also has an Americas map to show America stuff separately on a little cutout map. And I will hold that with World in Flames, like the map just looks a lot busier, right? You look at it and just like there's a million things staring you in the face. But all of that, I think, in my opinion, personal opinion, it's all good because it's telling you stuff for the game without being confusing, without it being too much tied back to some special rule. Though there are some, for the game itself, obviously, around certain geography features. But for the most part, what you see on the map is really just informative for the game, and you don't need to worry too much about special rules or things working differently from one another. A resource or an oil is a resource or an oil, and a factory is a factory, and if you can connect the two, you get a production point, rather than, okay, I've got to conquer Poland, and then I'm going to get 20 BRPs, but if I capture this other city and somewhere else, that's a different value. Everything is like each other in World in Flames, which I really, really like. So it is busy, and technically the map is bigger, so it takes more space, but I do like all of that. Okay, well, that was just all I wanted to do is have fun with maps and check them out. I might do more of these if I find more fun maps to look at. I've always loved history. I've only been into war board games for so many years, but before that, I played a lot of historical strategy games on the computer, and even before that, I just really like looking at maps anyway, so I'm a nerd who likes to stare at maps. War game maps tend to have a little more mechanical bits to them to analyze, so interesting stuff there. Maybe we'll look at doing more again if I can find some good comparisons to make. But in terms of your grand strategy World War II, again, these two series are kind of entwined with one another in a lot of ways, and interesting to see what one chooses to represent and how one doesn't, or what different types of things are they making use of. Which maps end up having probably wasted space, which ones show more detail, and just sort of the, how does the game play because of these different things that are, different between the two. Ultimately, just as a point of comparison, and I'm biased against World at War right now. That could change someday. So much of it feels like a World at War is like a bicycle with a rocket, a bicycle which is simple to operate, but is duct taped to and tied up to a rocket booster engine that is very complicated to operate. So you see the bicycle and you think, this will be fine, and then it's the rocket science apparatus stitched onto it that makes it complicated. Where I think World in Flames is just overall, it has bits that are just as complicated, but because it's all in synergy with itself, all things are like itself. It is like a single model vehicle, all one whole body. That its engine and its parts and its frame all are sort of designed together to work well. And I just think that ends up showing itself both in the map and in actual gameplay compared to a World at War. But again, I ask, if someone's got the willpower, why don't you record some instructional videos? That'd be nice. That'd be cool. I'd watch those. In the meantime, we'll keep playing stuff. So, all right, I'll get this video uploaded. I'm going to eat some lunch, and then I'm going to record some Dark Valley. So, hope you enjoyed watching this video. We'll see some more videos in the future for a variety of topics, I'm sure. And stick around for the Dark Valley stuff later. Probably get that uploaded later this evening. So, thanks for watching. We'll catch you later. Keep on gaming.